The train whistle pierced the quiet afternoon as Eliza Thompson clutched the crumpled advertisement in her trembling hand. Respectable rancher seeks bride of good character. Comfortable home and promising future awaits. The promise of those words had carried her and little Lucy across 1,000 miles of country. But as the conductor called Cedar Creek Station final stop, her courage wavered. Through the smudged window, all she could see was a weathered platform, a handful of wooden buildings, and endless plains stretching to distant mountains. No welcoming party, no husband-to-be, only an empty promise and the weight of her niece's small hand in hers. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Eliza's leather boots hit the wooden platform with a hollow thud that seemed to echo her own emptiness. 7-year-old Lucy followed, wide-eyed and silent, clutching the rag doll that had survived the long journey from Boston. The stationmaster, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, approached them with visible curiosity. "Ma'am, were you expecting someone to meet you?" His voice carried genuine concern that only deepened Eliza's growing unease. "Yes, Mr. Gerald Fletcher, from Broken Pine Ranch." She produced the letter with its faded ink and precise handwriting. "We've been corresponding for 6 months." The stationmaster's expression shifted, his eyes darting away from hers. "Fletcher's ranch, you say?" "Yes. Is there a problem?" He removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, but Gerald Fletcher passed on 3 months ago. Influenza swept through the county. Took quite a few." Eliza felt the ground tilt beneath her feet. They had sold everything. The small millinery shop her sister had left her, their few possessions, all for train tickets and the promise of a new beginning. Now they stood on a dusty platform in a town where they knew no one, with only $23 to their name. "I see," she managed, straightening her spine and adjusting her bonnet. She would not crumble, not in front of Lucy. "Is there a boarding house where we might stay while I consider our options?" The station master nodded, pointing down the single main street. "Mrs. Wilkins runs a clean place. Second building past the mercantile. Tell her Bill sent you." Eliza thanked him, gathering their 2 worn suitcases. Lucy tugged at her skirt, her small face pinched with worry. "Where's the man with the ranch, Aunt Eliza? The one in the letter?" Eliza knelt, her skirts billowing around her. "There's been a change of plans, little one. But don't you worry. We're Thompson women, and Thompson women always find a way." The words sounded hollow, even to her own ears, but Lucy nodded solemnly, her faith in her aunt absolute. Eliza wished she could borrow some of that certainty as they made their way down Cedar Creek's dusty main street. Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house offered a small room with a narrow bed they would share, but at least it was clean, with pressed linens and a window that caught the afternoon light. While Lucy napped, exhausted from their journey, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, trying to formulate a plan. Their funds would last perhaps 2 weeks. She could seek employment, but in a town this size, opportunities would be scarce, especially for a woman with a child to care for. A soft knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. Mrs. Wilkins stood there, a kind-faced woman with flour dusting her apron. "You look like you could use this," she said, offering a cup of tea. "Bill at the station told me your situation." Eliza accepted gratefully. "News travels quickly here." "Small towns have few secrets," Mrs. Wilkins said, settling into the room's only chair. "I'm sorry about Fletcher. He was a decent man, kept to himself mostly, but always paid his debts." "Did he have family who might have inherited the ranch?" Mrs. Wilkins shook her head. "No kin that anyone knows of. The bank's been trying to sort it out. The property's just sitting empty from what I hear. Though that won't last long with..." Victor Caldwell eyeing every parcel of land in the county. The name meant nothing to Eliza, but she filed it away. I need to find work, Mrs. Wilkins. I'm skilled with a needle, and I managed a millinery shop back in Boston. Cedar Creek. Might not have much call for fancy hats, Mrs. Wilkins said gently, but Martha at the general store might know of something. She keeps track of everyone's business. The next morning, Eliza dressed Lucy in her second-best dress, smoothed her own travel-worn skirt, and headed to the general store. Martha Jenkins proved to be a formidable woman with steel-grey hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Eliza from behind a cluttered counter. A milliner, you say? Not much call for that here, though some of the ladies might appreciate a bit of refinement. Martha tapped her fingers on the counter. Can you cook? Adequately. Laundry? Cleaning? Of course. Martha nodded. Might be Mrs. Cooper at the sheriff's house could use help. She's expecting their fourth child and overwhelmed, from what I hear. It wasn't the life Eliza had envisioned when answering Gerald Fletcher's advertisement, but it would keep them fed. She was about to thank Martha when the store's door swung open and a hush fell over the chattering customers. The man who entered moved with the cautious grace of someone accustomed to watching his surroundings. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, he wore a worn cavalry hat pulled low over eyes that scanned the room before settling on Martha. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to his jawline, giving his otherwise handsome features an intimidating asymmetry. "Miller," Martha greeted him, her tone noticeably different, respectful but wary. "Your monthly supplies are ready." He nodded without speaking, moving to the counter and placing a list beside Eliza. His sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing another scar circling his wrist. "Who's the cavalry scout?" Eliza whispered to Martha when the man moved away to examine a display of tools. Martha raised an eyebrow. "Thomas Miller runs the remains of a ranch out on Eagle Creek. Keeps to himself since coming back from the war. Some say the rebels held him prisoner for a spell." She lowered her voice further. "Folks give him a wide berth. He's changed since before the war." Eliza studied him with new interest. There was something in his deliberate movements that spoke of a man carrying invisible wounds. Miller concluded his business efficiently, exchanging few words with Martha, who scribbled in a ledger. As he gathered his supplies, a bag of flour split, spilling white powder across the wooden floor. Lucy, who had been quietly examining a shelf of candies, darted forward to help, kneeling to scoop flour back into the torn sack. "I can fix the bag, sir," she offered, looking up at Miller's imposing figure. "Aunt Eliza taught me to sew real good." Miller stared at the child, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he crouched to her level. "That's a kind offer, miss," he said, his voice rough from disuse but not unkind. "What's your name?" "Lucy Thompson, sir. We came on the train yesterday to marry Mr. Fletcher, but he's dead now." The blunt honesty of childhood silenced the store. Miller's eyes flicked to Eliza, who felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I apologize for my niece's forthrightness, Mr. Miller," she said, stepping forward. "We've had a difficult journey." He rose, slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Fletcher's mail-order bride. I was to be, yes." She lifted her chin slightly. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We were unaware of his passing when we departed Boston." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition of a fellow survivor, perhaps. Without another word, he nodded to Lucy, gathered his supplies, and left the store. "Well," Martha breathed after the door closed, "that's the most I've heard Thomas Miller speak in one go since '69. The exchange left Eliza strangely unsettled. There was something in Miller's direct gaze that had cut through pretense, assessing her situation in an instant. She pushed the and thought aside and focused on securing work at the sheriff's household. For 3 days, Eliza and Lucy settled into a rhythm of sorts. Eliza cleaned and cooked for the overwhelmed Mrs. Cooper, while Lucy played with the Cooper children. The pay was meager, but it would extend their stay at the boarding house. Each night, Eliza lay awake beside her sleeping niece, calculating how long they could survive before their funds dwindled completely. On the 4th morning, Sheriff Cooper himself appeared at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house as they were finishing breakfast. "Miss Thompson, got someone asking after you?" His expression was unreadable. "Thomas Miller's waiting outside." Eliza nearly dropped her teacup. "Mr. Miller? Whatever for?" The sheriff shrugged. Man of few words, that one. But he seemed determined. Curious stares followed Eliza as she stepped onto the porch. Miller stood beside a weathered wagon, his posture straight as a cavalry officer's, despite his civilian clothes. He removed his hat as she approached, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Miss Thompson," he said, nodding briskly, "I have a proposition." Eliza waited, keenly aware of the eyes watching from windows along the street. "My ranch needs attention I can't give while managing the cattle and land. The house is falling into disrepair. I need someone to restore order." His words came out clipped, as if he'd rehearsed them. "I'm offering employment for you and your niece, room, board, and fair wages." The directness caught her off guard. "Mr. Miller, while I appreciate the offer, propriety—" "Separate quarters," he interrupted. "The ranch house has 2 wings. You'd have privacy. This isn't a marriage proposal, Miss Thompson. It's a business arrangement." The distinction stung more than it should have. "I see. You came west expecting to run a ranch household. I'm offering that opportunity without the bonds of matrimony." His gaze was steady, challenging. "Unless you prefer laundry and floors at the Cooper house." Pride flared in her chest. "You're rather direct, Mr. Miller." Something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "War and wilderness leave little room for niceties." Eliza considered their options. Mrs. Cooper's household work would never provide enough to save for a return to Boston. Miller was offering a roof, meals, and wages, a chance to rebuild their resources while she planned their next steps. "I would need to see these accommodations first," she said finally, "and understand my duties clearly." He nodded once. "Reasonable. I can bring you to inspect the property today. If it's unsuitable, I'll return you to town by nightfall." "I'll need to bring Lucy." "Naturally." He gestured to the wagon. "Your decision, Miss Thompson." Eliza felt the weight of watchful eyes from the boarding house windows. Mrs. Wilkins would surely disapprove of her even considering such an arrangement. But propriety wouldn't feed Lucy or secure their future. "We'll come to see the property," she decided, nothing more. The journey to Broken Pine Ranch took nearly 2 hours across increasingly rugged terrain. Miller drove in silence, answering Lucy's occasional questions with surprising patience, but volunteering nothing. The child eventually dozed off, lulled by the wagon's rhythm, her head resting against Eliza's shoulder. "How did you know about Fletcher's advertisement?" Eliza asked when the silence grew too heavy. Miller's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Small community. Word travels. And you never considered such an arrangement yourself." His profile remained impassive. "Marriage requires more than I have to offer." Before she could probe further, the wagon crested a ridge and Broken Pine Ranch came into view. A weathered, 2-story house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, a creek winding past outbuildings and corrals. The setting was undeniably beautiful, with the distant Tetons creating a dramatic horizon, but signs of neglect were evident. Peeling paint, broken fence rails, an overgrown garden. "It's seen better days," Miller acknowledged, following her gaze. I maintain what's necessary for the cattle operation. The house has suffered. As they drew closer, Eliza noted that despite the disrepair, the structure itself appeared sound. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and numerous windows promised ample light. It was larger than she had expected, clearly built by someone with ambitions for family and prosperity. "Your family home?" she asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "Purchased after the war," he replied. "Previous owner died without heirs." Lucy awakened, her eyes widening at the sprawling property. "Is this where we'll live, Aunt Eliza?" "We're just visiting, sweetheart," Eliza cautioned, though something about the place tugged at her, its potential perhaps, or the peaceful setting after Boston's crowded streets. Miller led them through the house, his movements efficient and detached, like a cavalry scout reporting terrain features. The east wing contained a spacious kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a formal dining room, and a sitting room with empty bookshelves. Upstairs, several bedrooms sat unused, furnished but dusty. The west wing, he explained, contained his sparse quarters and an office. "You would manage the household," he said as they returned to the kitchen. "Meals, cleaning, mending. The garden needs revival. Previous owner's wife kept chickens. Coop's still sound. Could be again." Eliza ran her finger along a dusty countertop, and in exchange, "Room and board for both of you, $20 monthly." His gaze was direct. "More than the Cooper household pays, I expect." It was significantly more, and without the daily walk from town. Still, Eliza hesitated. Living under a stranger's roof, isolated from town, dependent on his goodwill, the vulnerabilities were obvious. "May I see the rest of the property?" Miller nodded, leading them. Outside, beyond the main house, stood a barn, stables, bunkhouse, and storage sheds. The corrals held a few horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on rolling grassland. It was a working ranch, not merely a homestead, though it clearly operated at reduced capacity. "How many hands do you employ?" she asked. "2 seasonal. Workers during calving and roundup. Otherwise, I manage alone." Eliza frowned. "That seems insufficient for a property this size." Something hardened in his expression. "I make do." Lucy had wandered to a small fenced area behind the kitchen where withered stalks indicated a long abandoned garden. "Aunt Eliza, look! There are flowers still." She pointed to persistent purple blooms fighting through the weeds. "Irises," Miller said unexpectedly. "They return every spring, no matter the neglect." The wistfulness in his tone caught Eliza by surprise. This scarred, taciturn man wasn't entirely the cold figure the townspeople described. There were layers beneath his reserve, layers she suddenly found herself curious to understand. "Mr. Miller," she said, turning to face him directly, "I appreciate your candor regarding this arrangement. Before I consider it further, I must ask, why me? Surely there are women in town who could manage your household without the complication of a child." He studied her for a moment, his expression inscrutable. "You came west, prepared to build a life from nothing, shows resilience, and..." He glanced at Lucy, now chasing a butterfly through the tall grass. "Children should have space to grow." It wasn't a complete answer, but it resonated with something in Eliza. She had indeed come west, ready to forge a new life. The fact that Gerald Fletcher had died didn't change her capability or determination. "If I accept," she said carefully, "I would require certain conditions. Lucy's education must continue. I would need occasional transport to town for supplies and social interaction. And while I understand this is a business arrangement, I expect respectful treatment." Miller nodded without hesitation. "Reasonable terms. There's a small library in town you could access. Mail comes weekly. Previous owner's wife left books upstairs. Educational materials among them, I believe." Eliza took a deep breath, weighing. Their future on the scales of practicality rather than convention. The opportunities in Cedar Creek were limited. Here, at least, they would have security, decent wages, and a chance to save for whatever came next. "We'll accept your offer on a trial basis," she decided. "1 month. If either party finds the arrangement unsuitable, we part ways without rancor." Relief flickered briefly across Miller's face. So quickly she almost missed it. "Agreed." Lucy came running back, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Aunt Eliza, I saw a rabbit. Can we stay here, please?" Eliza smoothed her niece's windblown hair. "Yes, Lucy, we're going to stay for a while." Miller extended his hand, the formal gesture at odds with their rural surroundings. "Welcome to Broken Pine Ranch, Miss Thompson." As Eliza's hand met his calloused palm, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd both just veered onto an unexpected trail. One neither had mapped, but which somehow promised more than the destinations they'd originally sought. They returned to Cedar Creek to collect their meager belongings and settle accounts at the boarding house. Mrs. Wilkins made no effort to hide her disapproval. "Living alone with that man. He barely speaks to another soul. Some say he's touched in the head from the war." "It's a business arrangement," Eliza insisted, packing their clothing into the worn suitcases. "And hardly alone. Lucy will be with me." "A child is no chaperone," Mrs. Wilkins sniffed. "Mark my words, your reputation will suffer." Perhaps it would have mattered more in Boston society, but here in Wyoming territory, Eliza suspected survival trumped social niceties. Still, she was grateful when Sheriff Cooper appeared as Miller's wagon was being loaded, pulling the taciturn rancher aside for a private word. "What did the sheriff want?" she asked as they departed, town buildings giving way to open country. Miller's jaw tightened. "Ensuring his conscience is clear by reminding me of my obligations as your employer." "I see." The knowledge that Cooper had appointed himself their protector was both reassuring and vaguely insulting. "And what did you tell him?" "That you're capable of defending your interests." His gaze slid to hers briefly. "And that I'm not in the business of making enemies of the law." The response startled a laugh from her. "Are you in the business of making other sorts of enemies, Mr. Miller?" For the first time, a genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his severe features. "Only when necessary, Miss Thompson." Their arrival at Broken Pine Ranch carried a different weight this time, the finality of a decision. Made, bridges burned. Miller carried their luggage upstairs to adjoining bedrooms in the east wing, then retreated to give them privacy to settle. The room, Eliza claimed, had clearly belonged to a woman once. Faded curtains framed windows overlooking the mountains, and a dressing table with an oval mirror sat in one corner. Lucy's smaller room connected through a door and featured a child-sized bed with a handmade quilt. "Someone with children lived here before," Lucy observed, running her hand over carved animals adorning the bedpost. "It seems so." Eliza wondered about the previous occupants, their dreams, their fate. Had they found happiness here before circumstances drove them away? Would she and Lucy find some measure of peace in these borrowed rooms? As twilight settled over the ranch, Eliza ventured downstairs to assess the kitchen. If she was to prepare meals starting tomorrow, she needed to inventory supplies. She found Miller there, setting a plate and cup on the table. "Don't expect you to start cooking tonight," he said gruffly. "There's stew, simple fare." The consideration surprised her. "Thank you." He nodded, turning to leave. "Mr. Miller," she called after him, "would you join us? It seems proper to dine together on our first evening." He hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to company. "If you wish." Their first meal at Broken Pine Ranch was a quiet affair. Lucy peppered Miller with questions about the property until Eliza gently reminded her that their host wasn't accustomed to such chatter. To her surprise, Miller answered each query patiently, his responses brief but not unkind. "Were you really a cavalry scout?" Lucy asked finally, voicing the question Eliza had been too proper to ask. Miller set down his spoon. "6th Cavalry, 4 years. Did you fight in battles?" His expression shuttered. "Yes." Lucy nodded solemnly. "My papa fought too, but he didn't come home." Eliza reached for her niece's hand. "Lucy's father, my brother-in-law, fell at Cold Harbor. Her mother, my sister, passed last winter from pneumonia." Understanding passed between the adults, the unspoken recognition of loss. "War takes more than just the fallen," Miller said quietly, his gaze distant. After Lucy was tucked into bed, Eliza returned downstairs to find Miller on the porch, smoking a pipe as darkness claimed the land. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain if her presence would be welcome. "Settling in?" he asked without turning. "Yes, thank you." She stepped onto the porch, maintaining a proper distance. "I wanted to discuss the household routine. What time do you typically take breakfast?" "Dawn. But don't trouble yourself immediately. Take time to orient yourself to the house." "I prefer to begin as we mean to continue," she said. "Structure benefits everyone, particularly Lucy." He studied her in the fading light. "You've shouldered considerable responsibility for one so young. We do what necessity demands." She straightened her shoulders. "I promised my sister I would care for Lucy as my own. That promise doesn't bend to circumstance." Miller's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Admirable. What of you, Mr. Miller? What circumstances brought you to this isolated existence?" He tapped his pipe against the porch railing, scattering embers that glowed briefly before dying. "War changes a man. Some adjustments are more visible than others." His hand unconsciously traced the scar on his face. "Town life holds little appeal now. Yet you've invited strangers into your sanctuary." His gaze returned to the darkened landscape. "A functioning ranch needs more than one pair of hands. Pride makes for poor company and poorer outcomes." It was the closest he'd come to admitting vulnerability, Eliza realized. This arrangement met his needs as much as hers, albeit differently. "Then we have a fair exchange," she said. "Your needs met, our security assured." He nodded once, definitive, precisely. As she bid him good night and returned upstairs to her borrowed bedroom, Eliza reflected on the strange turns that had led her here. She had left Boston seeking a husband, a partner to build a life with. Instead, she found herself in a business arrangement with a man who clearly preferred solitude to society. Yet something about Thomas Miller's quiet strength reassured her. His word, once given, seemed unbreakable. In a world where promises often proved hollow, that counted for something. She paused at Lucy's bedside, watching her niece's peaceful slumber. Perhaps this unexpected detour would prove beneficial. Lucy would have space to run, fresh air, animals to love. Eliza would have meaningful work and fair compensation. If Miller kept his distance emotionally, well, that was hardly different from the marriage of convenience she'd expected with Gerald Fletcher. As she slipped beneath cool sheets, Eliza reminded herself that this was temporary, a practical solution, until they could afford better options. She would not allow herself to grow attached to Broken Pine Ranch or its solitary owner. This wasn't the life she'd traveled west to find. Yet as sleep claimed her, the persistent thought followed her into dreams. Sometimes the best trails are those we never planned to walk. For 3 days, Eliza and Lucy settled into a fragile rhythm. Eliza cleaned and cooked for the overwhelmed Mrs. Cooper, while Lucy played with the Cooper children. The pay was meager, but it would extend their stay at the boarding house. Each night, Eliza lay awake beside her sleeping niece, calculating how long they could survive before their funds dwindled completely. The figures never balanced, no matter how she adjusted them. On the fourth morning, Sheriff Cooper himself appeared at Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house as they were finishing breakfast. "Miss Thompson, got someone asking after you." His expression was unreadable beneath his mustache. Thomas Miller's waiting outside. Eliza nearly dropped her teacup. "Mr. Miller, whatever for?" The sheriff shrugged. Man of few words, that one. But he seemed determined. Curious stares followed Eliza as she stepped onto the porch. Miller stood beside a weathered wagon, his posture straight as a cavalry officer's, despite his civilian clothes. He removed his hat as she approached, revealing dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Miss Thompson," he said, nodding briskly. "I have a proposition." Eliza waited, keenly aware of the eyes watching from windows along the street. "My ranch needs attention I can't give while managing the cattle and land. The house is falling into disrepair." His words came out clipped as if he'd rehearsed them. "I'm offering employment for you and your niece, room, board, and fair wages." The directness caught her off guard. "Mr. Miller, while I appreciate the offer, propriety—" "Separate quarters," he interrupted. "The ranch house has 2 wings. You'd have privacy. This isn't a marriage proposal, Miss Thompson. It's a business arrangement." The distinction stung more than it should have. "I see. You came west expecting to run a ranch household. I'm offering that opportunity without the bonds of matrimony." His gaze was steady, challenging. "Unless you prefer laundry and floors at the Cooper house." Pride flared in her chest. "You're rather direct, Mr. Miller." Something almost like amusement flickered across his face. "War and wilderness leave little room for niceties." Eliza considered their options. Mrs. Cooper's household work would never provide enough to save for a return to Boston. Miller was offering a roof, meals, and wages, a chance to rebuild their resources while she planned their next steps. "I would need to see these accommodations first," she said finally, "and understand my duties clearly." He nodded once. "Reasonable. I can bring you to inspect the property today. If it's unsuitable, I'll return you to town by nightfall. I'll need to bring Lucy." "Naturally." He gestured to the wagon. "Your decision, Miss Thompson." Eliza felt the weight of watchful eyes from the boarding house windows. Mrs. Wilkins would surely disapprove of her even considering such an arrangement, but propriety wouldn't feed Lucy or secure their future. "We'll come to see the property," she decided, nothing more. The journey to Broken Pine Ranch took nearly 2 hours across increasingly rugged terrain. Miller drove in silence, answering Lucy's occasional questions with surprising patience, but volunteering nothing. The child eventually dozed off, lulled by the wagon's rhythm, her head resting against Eliza's shoulder. "How did you know about Fletcher's advertisement?" Eliza asked when the silence grew too heavy. Miller's hands tightened slightly on the reins. "Small community, word travels, and you never considered such an arrangement yourself?" His profile remained impassive. "Marriage requires more than I have to offer." Before she could probe further, the wagon crested a ridge and Broken Pine Ranch came into view. A weathered, 2-story house sat nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, a creek winding past outbuildings and corrals. The setting was undeniably beautiful, with the distant Tetons creating a dramatic horizon, but signs of neglect were evident. Peeling, paint, broken fence rails, an overgrown garden. "It's seen better days," Miller acknowledged, following her gaze. "I maintain what's necessary for the cattle operation. The house has suffered." As they drew closer, Eliza noted that despite the disrepair, the structure itself appeared sound. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and numerous windows promised ample light. It was larger than she had expected, clearly built by someone with ambitions for family and prosperity. "Your family home?" she asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "Purchased after the war," he replied. "Previous owner died without heirs." Lucy awakened, her eyes widening at the sprawling property. "Is this where we'll live, Aunt Eliza?" "We're just visiting, sweetheart," Eliza cautioned, though something about the place tugged at her, its potential perhaps, or the peaceful setting after Boston's crowded streets. Miller led them through the house, his movements efficient and detached, like a cavalry scout reporting terrain features. The east wing contained a spacious kitchen with a cast-iron stove, a formal dining room, and a sitting room with empty bookshelves. Upstairs, several bedrooms sat unused, furnished but dusty. The west wing, he explained, contained his sparse quarters and an office. "You would manage the household," he said as they returned to the kitchen. "Meals, cleaning, mending. The garden needs revival. Previous owner's wife kept chickens, coops still sound. And could be again." Eliza ran her finger along a dusty countertop. "And in exchange, room and board for both of you, $20 monthly." His gaze was direct. "More than the Cooper household pays, I expect." It was significantly more, and without the daily walk from town. Still, Eliza hesitated. Living under a stranger's roof, isolated from town, dependent on his goodwill, the vulnerabilities were obvious. "May I see the rest of the property?" Miller nodded, leading them outside. Beyond the main house stood a barn, stables, bunkhouse, and storage sheds. The corrals held a few horses, and in the distance, cattle grazed on rolling grassland. It was a working ranch, not merely a homestead, though it clearly operated at reduced capacity. "How many hands do you employ?" she asked. "2 seasonal, workers during calving and roundup. Otherwise, I manage alone." Eliza frowned. "That seems insufficient for a property this size." Something hardened in his expression. "I make do." Lucy had wandered to a small fenced area behind the kitchen where withered stalks indicated a long-abandoned garden. "Aunt Eliza, look! There are flowers still." She pointed to persistent purple blooms fighting through the weeds. "Irises," Miller said unexpectedly. "They return every spring, no matter the neglect." The wistfulness in his tone caught Eliza by surprise. This scarred, taciturn man wasn't entirely the cold figure the townspeople described. There were layers beneath. His reserve, layers she suddenly found herself curious to understand. "Mr. Miller," she said, turning to face him directly, "I appreciate your candor regarding this arrangement. Before I consider it further, I must ask, why me? Surely there are women in town who could manage your household without the complication of a child." He studied her for a moment, his expression inscrutable. "You came west, prepared to build a life from nothing, shows resilience and—" He glanced at Lucy, now chasing a butterfly through the tall grass. "Children should have space to grow." It wasn't a complete answer, but it resonated with something in Eliza. She had indeed come west, ready to forge a new life. The fact that Gerald Fletcher had died didn't change her capability or determination. "If I accept," she said carefully, "I would require certain conditions. Lucy's education must continue. I would need occasional transport to town for supplies and social interaction. And while I understand this is a business arrangement, I expect respectful treatment." Miller nodded without hesitation. "Reasonable terms. There's a small library in town you could access. Mail comes weekly. Previous owner's wife left books upstairs. Educational materials among them, I believe." Eliza took a deep breath, weighing their future on the scales of practicality rather than convention. The opportunities in Cedar Creek were limited. Here at least, they would have security, decent wages, and a chance to save for whatever came next. "We'll accept your offer on a trial basis," she decided. 1 month. If either party finds the arrangement unsuitable, we part ways without rancor." Relief flickered briefly across Miller's face, so quickly she almost missed it. "Agreed." Lucy came running back, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Aunt Eliza, I saw a rabbit. Can we stay here, please?" Eliza smoothed her niece's wind-blown hair. "Yes, Lucy, we're going to stay for a while." Miller extended his hand, the formal gesture at odds with their rural surroundings. "Welcome to Broken Pine Ranch, Miss Thompson." As Eliza's hand met his calloused palm, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd both just veered onto an unexpected trail, one neither had mapped, but which somehow promised more than the destinations they'd originally sought. They returned to Cedar Creek to collect their meager belongings and settle accounts at the boarding house. Mrs. Wilkins made no effort to hide her disapproval. "Living alone with that man? He barely speaks to another soul. Some say he's touched in the head from the war." "It's a business arrangement," Eliza insisted, packing their clothing into the worn suitcases. "And hardly alone. Lucy will be with me." "A child is no chaperone," Mrs. Wilkins sniffed. "Mark my words, your reputation will suffer. Perhaps it would have mattered more in Boston society, but here in Wyoming territory, Eliza suspected survival trumped social niceties. Still, she was grateful when Sheriff Cooper appeared as Miller's wagon was being loaded, pulling the taciturn rancher aside for a private word. "What did the sheriff want?" she asked as they departed. Town buildings giving way to open country. Miller's jaw tightened. "Ensuring his conscience is clear by reminding me of my obligations as your employer." "I see." The knowledge that Cooper had appointed himself their protector was both reassuring and vaguely insulting. "And what did you tell him? That you're capable of defending your interests?" His gaze slid to hers briefly. "And that I'm not in the business of making enemies of the law?" The response startled a laugh from her. "Are you in the business of making other sorts of enemies, Mr. Miller?" For the first time, a genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, transforming his severe features. "Only when necessary, Miss Thompson." Their arrival at Broken Pine Ranch carried a different weight this time, the finality of a decision. Made, bridges burned. Miller carried their luggage upstairs to adjoining bedrooms in the east wing, then retreated to give them privacy to settle in. The room, Eliza claimed, had clearly belonged to a woman once. Faded curtains framed windows overlooking the mountains, and a dressing table with an oval mirror sat in one corner. Lucy's smaller room connected through a door and featured a child-sized bed with a handmade quilt. "Someone with children lived here before," Lucy observed, running her hand over carved animals adorning the bedpost. "It seems so." Eliza wondered about the previous occupants, their dreams, their fate. Had they found happiness here before circumstances drove them away? Would she and Lucy find some measure of peace in these borrowed rooms? As twilight settled over the ranch, Eliza ventured downstairs to assess the kitchen. If she was to prepare meals starting tomorrow, she needed to inventory supplies. She found Miller there, setting a plate and cup on the table. "Don't expect you to start cooking tonight," he said gruffly. "There's stew, simple fare." The consideration surprised her. "Thank you," he nodded, turning to leave. "Mr. Miller," she called after him, "would you join us? It seems proper to dine together on our first evening." He hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to company. "If you wish." Their first meal at Broken Pine Ranch was a quiet affair. Lucy peppered Miller with questions about the property until Eliza gently reminded her that their host wasn't accustomed to such chatter. To her surprise, Miller answered each query patiently, his responses brief but not unkind. "Were you really a cavalry scout?" Lucy asked finally, voicing the question Eliza had been too proper to ask. Miller set down his spoon. 6th Cavalry, 4 years. "Did you fight in battles?" His expression shuttered. "Yes." Lucy nodded solemnly. "My papa fought too, but he didn't come home." Eliza reached for her niece's hand. Lucy's father, My brother-in-law fell at Cold Harbor. Her mother, my sister, passed last winter from pneumonia. Understanding passed between the adults, the unspoken recognition of loss. War takes more than just the fallen, Miller said quietly, his gaze distant. After Lucy was tucked into bed, Eliza returned downstairs to find Miller on the porch, smoking a pipe as darkness claimed the land. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain if her presence would be welcome. "Settling in?" he asked without turning. "Yes, thank you." She stepped onto the porch, maintaining a proper distance. "I wanted to discuss the household routine. What time do you typically take breakfast?" "Dawn, but don't trouble yourself immediately. Take time to orient yourself to the house." "I prefer to begin as we mean to continue," she said. "Structure benefits everyone, particularly Lucy." He studied her in the fading light. "You've shouldered considerable responsibility for one so young." "We do what necessity demands." She straightened her shoulders. "I promised my sister I would care. For Lucy as my own, that promise doesn't bend to circumstance." Miller's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Admirable. What of you, Mr. Miller? What circumstances brought you to this isolated existence?" He tapped his pipe against the porch railing, scattering embers that glowed briefly before. "Dying. War changes a man. Some adjustments are more visible than others." His hand unconsciously traced the scar on his face. "Town life holds little appeal now. Yet you've invited strangers into your sanctuary." His gaze returned to the darkened landscape. "A functioning ranch needs more than one pair of hands. Pride makes for poor company and poorer outcomes." It was the closest he'd come to admitting vulnerability, Eliza realized. This arrangement met his needs as much as hers, albeit differently. "Then we have a fair exchange," she said. "Your needs met, our security assured." He nodded once, definitive. "Precisely." As she bid him good night and returned upstairs to her borrowed bedroom, Eliza reflected on the strange turns that had led her here. She had left Boston seeking a husband, a partner to build a life with. Instead, she found herself in a business arrangement with a man who clearly preferred solitude to society. Yet something about Thomas Miller's quiet strength reassured her. His word, once given, seemed unbreakable. In a world where promises often proved hollow, that counted for something. She paused at Lucy's bedside, watching her niece's peaceful slumber. Perhaps this unexpected detour would prove beneficial. Lucy would have space to run, fresh air, animals to love. Eliza would have meaningful work and fair compensation. If Miller kept his distance emotionally, well, that was hardly different from the marriage of convenience she'd expected with Gerald Fletcher. As she slipped beneath cool sheets, Eliza reminded herself that this was temporary, a practical solution, until they could afford better options. She would not allow herself to grow attached to Broken Pine Ranch or its solitary owner. This wasn't the life she'd traveled west to find. Yet, as sleep claimed her, the persistent thought followed her into dreams. Sometimes the best trails are those we never planned to walk. The first week at Broken Pine Ranch established a careful routine. Eliza rose before dawn to stoke the kitchen fire and prepare a hearty breakfast. Miller would appear silently, nodding his thanks as she set a plate before him. They rarely spoke during these early meals, but the silence grew more comfortable with each passing day. After breakfast, Miller would disappear to tend to the cattle, check fences, or manage other ranch duties. Eliza turned her attention to the house, tackling years of neglect one room at a time. She spent the first 3 days just cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing floors and woodwork until her hands were raw, but the cast iron stove gleamed and the pine table shone golden in the morning light. Lucy proved an enthusiastic helper, dusting chair legs and lower shelves with uncharacteristic diligence. The child bloomed in the open spaces of the ranch, her cheeks growing rosy, her nightmares less frequent. Each morning, she would race outside, after her chores, returning with treasures, interestingly shaped stones, feathers, once a turtle shell found by the creek. Miller seemed bemused by the girl's collections, which she proudly displayed on the porch railing. He never discouraged her explorations, though he did establish firm boundaries about where she could wander alone. The creek, the horse corrals, and the far pastures were strictly off-limits without an adult. Lucy, to Eliza's relief, accepted these rules without argument. On their 5th day, Eliza discovered the pantry's sorry state. Dwindling supplies of beans, flour, and coffee would barely last another week. At dinner, she broached the subject with Miller. "We'll need to make a trip to town soon," she said, passing him a plate of cornbread. "The pantry requires restocking." Miller nodded. Saturday, market day. His answers remained economical, but Eliza had begun to read his expressions more fluently. Lucy would benefit from the outing as well, a change of scenery. "You've made remarkable progress on the house," he observed, changing the subject but acknowledging her work for the first time. "Previous owner's wife kept it spotless. You've restored that." Eliza warmed at the unexpected praise. "The house has good bones, as my mother would say. It deserves proper care." Miller's gaze lingered on her face for a moment. "As do all valuable things." The comment, delivered in his usual matter-of-fact tone, nonetheless left Eliza feeling oddly flustered. She busied herself with clearing the plates, wondering why such a simple remark should affect her so. Saturday dawned clear and cool, a perfect spring day for the journey to Cedar Creek. Lucy could barely contain her excitement as Miller brought the wagon around. Eliza had spent the previous evening mending their best dresses, determined they would present a respectable appearance despite their circumstances. Miller himself had traded his worn work clothes for a clean shirt and vest. The change, subtle though it was, emphasized his military bearing. With his hat set squarely and his posture straight, he looked more the cavalry officer than the solitary rancher. The scar on his face seemed less prominent somehow. "You look very nice, Mr. Miller," Lucy announced with a child's disarming honesty. As he helped her into the wagon, a flush of color touched his weathered cheeks. "Thank you, Miss Lucy." Eliza bit back a smile as she accepted his hand, stepping up to the wagon seat. His palm was warm against hers, the brief contact sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. She released his hand quickly, settling her skirts around her. The journey to town passed pleasantly, with Lucy chattering about the wildlife she'd observed at the ranch and Miller occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming distant geological features. Eliza studied his profile surreptitiously. In the week they'd lived under his roof, Thomas Miller remained largely a mystery. His dedication to the ranch was evident, his work ethic unimpeachable, but the man himself, his thoughts, his past, beyond the bare facts of his military service, remained shuttered behind his reserved demeanor. Cedar Creek appeared busier than when they'd left it. Market day had drawn farmers and ranchers from outlying areas, their wagons lining the main street. Miller helped them down at the general store, handing Eliza a folded list. "Ranch supplies," he explained. "Take what you need for the household as well. I'll settle the bill before we leave." "Shall we meet here in 2 hours?" Eliza suggested. He nodded. "I have business at the bank and land office. Lucy," he addressed the child directly, "would you like a peppermint stick when we return?" Lucy's eyes widened. "Yes, please, Mr. Miller." He touched the brim of his hat, the gesture containing a warmth Eliza hadn't witnessed before. "Mind your aunt, then." As he strode away, Eliza felt a surge of something dangerously close to affection. Such small kindnesses, remembering a child's sweet tooth, offering it as reward for good behavior, revealed glimpses of the man beneath the taciturn exterior. Inside the general store, Martha Jenkins greeted them with poorly concealed curiosity. Miss Thompson and little Lucy, settling in at Miller's place, I hear. News traveled fast in Cedar Creek, just as Mrs. Wilkins had warned. Eliza straightened her shoulders. Yes, the arrangement is working quite satisfactorily. Mr. Miller has been most proper and respectful. Martha raised an eyebrow, clearly disappointed by the lack of scandal. Well, you've certainly improved his appearance. Don't think I've seen him in a clean shirt since Christmas service. Eliza felt her cheeks warm. I merely ensure his laundry is done properly, as per our agreement. Now we need several items. She handed over Miller's list, then added her own household requirements. As Martha gathered the supplies, other shoppers entered, their curious gazes following Eliza and Lucy. A heavy-set woman in an expensive dress approached, her smile not reaching her eyes. You must be Miss Thompson. I'm Agatha Caldwell, Victor Caldwell's wife. She extended a gloved hand. We're the largest ranch in the county. Eliza recognized the name from Mrs. Wilkins' gossip. A pleasure, Mrs. Caldwell. Such an unusual arrangement you've made with Mr. Miller. The entire town is talking. Mrs. Caldwell's tone suggested scandal rather than admiration. It's a straightforward business agreement, Eliza replied evenly. Mr. Miller requires household management and I require employment. How progressive of you both. Mrs. Caldwell turned her attention to Lucy, who was examining a display of fabric. And this must be your daughter? My niece, Eliza corrected firmly. My sister's child. Ah, well, should you find ranch life unsuitable, the Caldwell household always needs capable staff. My husband pays generously for the right people. The offer, thinly veiled as charity, rankled. Thank you, but our arrangement with Mr. Miller is quite satisfactory. Mrs. Caldwell's smile tightened. Of course, though I wonder if you truly understand what you've aligned yourself with. Thomas Miller isn't well regarded in certain circles. His methods of acquiring that property raised eyebrows. Eliza frowned. I don't follow. No. Perhaps you should ask your employer how he managed to purchase Broken Pine when half the county wanted that land. Mrs. Caldwell patted Eliza's arm condescendingly. Just neighborly advice, my dear. Before Eliza could respond, the store's door opened and Sheriff Cooper entered, nodding to the ladies. Mrs. Caldwell, Miss Thompson, fine day. Indeed, Sheriff. Mrs. Caldwell's demeanor shifted to practiced charm. I was just welcoming Miss Thompson to our community. Very neighborly, Cooper replied, though his expression suggested he'd witnessed enough to doubt the sentiment. Miss Thompson, how are you finding life at Broken Pine? Quite well, thank you. Eliza was grateful for the interruption. Mr. Miller has been an excellent employer. Glad to hear it. Cooper tipped his hat. If you ever need anything, my door's always open. The implied protection both touched and irritated Eliza. Did everyone assume Thomas Miller harbored nefarious intentions? His reserve might be off-putting, but she'd seen nothing to suggest he was dangerous or dishonest. After completing their purchases, Eliza led Lucy to the small library Mrs. Wilkins had mentioned. It occupied a corner of the schoolhouse, which stood dark and empty on a Saturday. Lucy selected 2 books about animals, while Eliza chose a volume of practical household management and, on impulse, a collection of poetry. As they walked back toward the general store, Lucy skipping ahead, Eliza caught sight of Miller emerging from the land office. He was engaged in what appeared to be a tense conversation with a tall, expensively dressed man. Even from a distance, Miller's rigid posture conveyed anger, though his expression remained controlled. The other man, Victor Caldwell, she presumed, was. Gesturing emphatically, his face flushed. Miller shook his head once, definitively, then turned away. Caldwell grabbed his arm, stopping him. For a moment, Eliza feared violence would erupt. Instead, Miller removed the man's hand from his sleeve with deliberate care and continued walking, his back straight as a ramrod. Eliza quickened her pace, reaching the general store just as Miller arrived. His expression was thunderous, though. It softened marginally when Lucy ran to greet him. "Did you remember my peppermint stick, Mr. Miller?" she asked, oblivious to his mood. "I always keep my promises, Miss Lucy." He produced a striped candy from his pocket, his voice gentler than Eliza had ever heard it. As Lucy accepted the treat with delight, Eliza stepped closer to Miller. "Is everything all right? I saw you speaking with Mr. Caldwell." Miller's jaw tightened. Caldwell always has opinions about matters that don't concern him, such as my property, my business. Miller's gaze met hers directly. "My household, arrangements." Heat rushed to Eliza's cheeks. "I see." "Do you?" His voice lowered, meant for her ears alone. "Caldwell wanted broken pine when it came up for sale. Still does. He'll use any leverage to get what he wants." "Including spreading rumors about your new housekeeper?" Eliza asked, her voice equally low. "Especially that." Miller's expression darkened. "Caldwell believes everyone and everything has a price." "And you don't?" The question hung between them, weighted with implications. Miller studied her face for a long moment. "Some things," he said finally, "are beyond price." Before Eliza could determine what he meant, Martha Jenkins approached with their packaged supplies. "All ready for you, Mr. Miller. Shall I add it to your account?" The moment broken, Miller turned to business, settling their purchases, while Eliza helped Lucy into the wagon. As they prepared to depart, Mrs. Caldwell emerged from the millinery shop across the street, her husband joining her moments later. The couple watched them openly, Victor Caldwell's expression calculating. "They don't like you very much," Lucy observed, as Miller guided the wagon past the Caldwells. "No, they don't," Miller agreed, surprising Eliza with his candor to the child. "Why not? You're nice." A ghost of a smile touched Miller's lips. "Because having nice things isn't the same as being nice, Miss Lucy, and some people only understand the first part." The cryptic response seemed to satisfy Lucy, who settled back against the wagon seat, content with her peppermint stick and new books. But Eliza found herself troubled by the exchange with the Caldwells and Mrs. Caldwell's insinuations about Miller's acquisition of broken pine. What exactly had happened when the property changed hands? As they left Cedar Creek behind, Miller seemed to relax gradually, his shoulders loosening as the town disappeared from view. The open country stretched before them, the Tetons shimmering in the distance. "Mr. Miller," Eliza began cautiously, "may I ask you a personal question?" He glanced at her, wariness returning to his features. "You may ask." "How did you come to own Broken Pine Ranch?" His hands tightened on the reins almost imperceptibly. "Legally," he said after a pause. "If that's your concern, it isn't. I'm merely curious about its history." Miller was silent so long, Eliza thought he wouldn't answer. Then, with Lucy dozing against her side, he spoke quietly. "I scouted this territory during the war, passed through this valley and remembered. After my discharge, I came back. The previous owner, James Harrington, was dying consumption. No family left. Place was failing." Miller's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "I worked for him that last year. Learned the operation. When he passed, he left it to me. That's why Caldwell resents you," Eliza realized. "He expected to buy it." Miller nodded once. Harrington hated Caldwell. Man tried to pressure him into selling for years, drove smaller. Ranchers out, diverted water rights, undercut prices at market. So leaving you the ranch was Harrington's final stand against Caldwell's expansion? Partly. A muscle worked in Miller's jaw. Also thought I'd honor his vision for the place, keep it whole. Eliza considered this new information. It explained much about Miller's determination to maintain the ranch despite its challenges, his resistance to Caldwell's continued pressure. It wasn't merely livelihood at stake, but a promise to a dying man. "You've managed admirably," she said softly, "especially alone." Miller's gaze shifted to her, something unreadable in his expression. Not alone now. Summer settled over Broken Pine Ranch with relentless heat, the Wyoming sun bleaching the grass to pale gold and turning the distant mountains into shimmering mirages. Eliza had adapted to the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she'd expected. Her hands, once soft from Boston society, had grown calloused from work, kneading bread, tending the revived garden, mending Miller's work shirts. The east wing of the house had transformed under her care, dust and neglect giving way to polished surfaces and cheerful curtains sewn from fabric ordered from Martha Jenkins's store. Lucy had thrived in the wide open spaces, her pale cheeks becoming sun-kissed, her city timidity replaced by the confident stride of a child comfortable in her surroundings. She had appointed herself assistant to both adults, helping Eliza with household tasks in the morning and following Miller around the ranch in the afternoons, absorbing his laconic explanations of cattle and horses with solemn attention. The arrangement between Eliza and Miller had settled into something comfortable, if difficult to define. Their interactions remained largely professional, though small changes had emerged. He lingered longer at breakfast, occasionally offering comments about the day's weather or ranch operations without being prompted. Sometimes, Eliza would look up from her work to find his gaze on her, thoughtful and assessing before he turned away. These moments left her oddly breathless, aware of currents shifting beneath the surface of their business arrangement. One scorching afternoon, with Lucy napping upstairs after an exciting morning helping Miller repair a section of fence, Eliza was startled by the sound of an approaching wagon. Visitors were rare at Broken Pine. Even Martha Jenkins only delivered supplies once a month. She wiped flour-covered hands on her apron and moved to the window, surprised to see an unfamiliar buggy pulling up to the hitching post. A woman descended, elegantly dressed despite the dust of travel, her posture straight and confident. Something about her bearing suggested wealth and position, out of place in the rugged surroundings of the ranch. She glanced around the property, with a proprietary air that immediately put Eliza on edge. Miller emerged from the barn, his stride slowing visibly when he spotted the visitor. Even from a distance, Eliza could see tension in his shoulders as he approached the woman. They spoke. Briefly, Miller's posture growing increasingly rigid with each exchange. When he gestured toward the house, Eliza stepped back from the window, not wanting to be caught watching. Moments later, the front door opened and Miller entered with the stranger. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar formality, "this is Mrs. Eleanor Harrington." The name registered immediately. Harrington, the previous owner of Broken Pine, the man who had willed the property to Miller. This must be a relative, though Miller had stated the man had no family. Eliza smoothed her work dress self-consciously, aware of the contrast between her practical appearance and Mrs. Harrington's fashionable attire. "Mrs. Harrington, this is Miss Eliza Thompson, my—" Miller hesitated, the pause stretching awkwardly. "Housekeeper." Something flashed in Eleanor Harrington's eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or skepticism. "Charmed, I'm sure," she said, her accent refined and distinctly Eastern. "Though Thomas fails to mention you're rather more than a housekeeper from what I gather in town." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication. "I assure you, ma'am, our arrangement is entirely professional. I manage the household while Mr. Miller focuses on ranch operations." Eleanor smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "Of course, how practical." She turned to Miller. "I hoped we might speak privately, Thomas, about matters of inheritance." Miller's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Miss Thompson is aware of how I acquired Broken Pine. There's no need for privacy. Very well. Eleanor removed her gloves with deliberate precision. I'll be direct then. My husband's mental state during his final illness is the subject of some concern, specifically his capacity to make legally binding decisions regarding his estate. Eliza glanced at Miller, whose expression had hardened into an unreadable mask. James Harrington was of sound mind when he willed me this property, he said flatly. The territorial judge confirmed it, based on your testimony and that of a doctor who barely knew him. Eleanor's smile turned brittle. However, as his wife, I had more intimate knowledge of his deterioration. The revelation landed like a physical blow. Wife, Miller had specifically told Eliza that James Harrington had no family left. Why would he lie about something so significant? Ex-wife, Miller corrected coldly, divorced 3 years before his death. You forfeited any claim to Broken Pine when you left him for that banker in Chicago. Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. Legal technicalities. The point remains that James was not himself in those final months. The idea that he would leave his family legacy to a drifting war veteran he barely knew stretches credibility. Mrs. Harrington, Eliza interrupted, unable to remain silent in the face of such accusations. Mr. Miller has managed this property with dedication and integrity. Whatever your history with the previous owner, surely your quarrel isn't with the current state of Broken Pine. Eleanor's gaze shifted to Eliza, assessing her with cool calculation. My quarrel, Miss Thompson, is with deception and opportunism, particularly when it affects what rightfully belongs to my son. Son? Eliza couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. James Jr., currently finishing his education at Harvard. Eleanor's expression softened slightly at the mention of her child. This ranch has been in the Harrington family for 2 generations. It should pass to the 3rd, not to an unrelated drifter who happened to befriend a dying man. Miller's posture had grown increasingly rigid during this exchange. James specifically disinherited both you and your son in his will. His exact words were that neither of you valued the land for anything beyond its sale price. A cruel sentiment likely coached from him during his illness. Eleanor's gaze hardened. My attorneys believe we have grounds to contest the will. James's mental faculties were compromised by both illness and medication. And there's the question of undue influence. Meaning me, Miller said flatly, a destitute former soldier with war injuries suddenly becoming the sole confidant of a wealthy, isolated rancher. Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Even you must admit how it appears, Thomas. Eliza watched the exchange with growing unease, not just the threat to Miller's ownership of Broken Pine, but the realization that there was much about Thomas Miller she still didn't know. He had simplified the story of how he acquired the ranch, omitting significant details about the previous owner's family situation. Your concerns are noted, Mrs. Harrington, Miller said, his voice controlled despite the obvious tension in his body. Now, if you've delivered your message, I have work to attend to. Eleanor smiled thinly. Actually, I'll be staying in Cedar Creek for some time. The Caldwells have graciously offered their hospitality while my attorneys review the case. She replaced her gloves with deliberate precision. We'll have plenty of opportunity to continue this discussion. The mention of the Caldwells sent a chill through Eliza. Victor Caldwell's interest in acquiring Broken Pine was well known. An alliance between Caldwell and Harrington's ex-wife represented a formidable threat. I'll see you out, Miller said curtly, guiding Eleanor toward the door. Through the window, Eliza watched their exchange on the porch, Eleanor speaking earnestly, Miller responding with short, negative gestures. When the woman finally returned to her buggy and departed, Miller remained on the porch, his hands gripping the railing with such force. His knuckles whitened. Eliza waited a respectful moment before joining him outside. "You never mentioned that James Harrington had been married." Miller didn't turn. "It wasn't relevant." "A contested inheritance seems quite relevant," she observed quietly, "especially one that might be supported by Victor Caldwell." His shoulders tensed further. "Eleanor has no legal claim. The divorce settlement was clear and final. But her son, James Jr., wanted nothing to do with his father or this ranch," Miller interrupted sharply. "Visited once in the 3 years I worked here. Stayed for 2 days, complained constantly, left early." Eliza moved to stand beside him, noting the muscle working in his jaw. "Why didn't you tell me this when I asked how you acquired the property?" Miller was silent so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost defensive. "People make assumptions that I manipulated a vulnerable old man, that I was looking for an easy claim to land without working for it. Is that what happened between James Harrington and his family? Did they want to sell the ranch against his wishes? Eleanor married James for his wealth and position. When both proved less substantial than she'd hoped, she found greener pastures." Bitterness edged his words. "She wanted him to sell to Caldwell even then, take the money and move east. When he refused, she divorced him and took their son. And now she's back with Caldwell's support." Eliza frowned, considering the implications. "This feels calculated, not coincidental." Miller turned to face her finally, his expression grim. "Caldwell's been trying to acquire Broken Pine for years. The water rights alone are worth fighting. Before, he likely heard about you and Lucy arriving, saw a chance to exploit the situation." "Me?" Eliza was startled by the suggestion. "How would our presence affect anything?" "A respectable woman and child living with a bachelor rancher creates gossip," Miller said bluntly. "Makes people question my character, my stability. If Eleanor can paint me as someone who takes advantage of vulnerable people, first a dying man, then a desperate woman, it strengthens her claim that I manipulated James into changing his will." The assessment was coldly practical, yet Eliza couldn't help feeling a sting at being categorized as merely a potential liability. "I see. So my presence here complicates your legal position." Something flickered in Miller's eyes. Regret, perhaps. "I didn't mean—" "No, you're quite right." Eliza smoothed her apron, striving for a matching pragmatism. "The arrangement does appear unconventional to outside observers. Perhaps we should reconsider its wisdom, given these new circumstances." "That's not what I'm suggesting." Miller's voice roughened. "Eleanor and Caldwell would use any situation to their advantage. Your leaving would simply give them a different narrative to exploit." Before Eliza could respond, the sound of small footsteps interrupted them. Lucy emerged onto the porch, hair mussed from her nap, clutching the rag doll that had traveled with her from Boston. "Who was that lady?" she asked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "I saw her from my window." Miller's expression softened, as it always did around the child. "Just someone with business questions, Miss Lucy. Nothing important." Lucy accepted this, with the easy trust of childhood. "Can we check on the new kittens in the barn now? You promised after my nap." "So I did." Miller glanced at Eliza, something like apology in his gaze. "We'll continue this discussion later?" Eliza nodded, watching as he took Lucy's small hand in his and headed toward the barn. The tenderness of the gesture contrasted sharply with the tension of moments before, a reminder of the complexities beneath Miller's reserved exterior. Inside, she moved mechanically through the motions of dinner preparation, her mind racing with implications of Eleanor Harrington's appearance. The comfortable routine she and Lucy had established at Broken Pine suddenly felt precarious, threatened by forces beyond their control. If Miller lost the ranch, what would become of them? The money she'd saved from her wages wouldn't get them far, certainly not back to Boston. More troubling was the realization that Miller had withheld significant information about his acquisition of the property. While she understood his reluctance to share potentially damaging details, the omission created a crack in the foundation of trust they'd been building. What else might he have simplified or concealed? By the time Miller and Lucy returned from the barn, Eliza had composed herself, determined to maintain normalcy for the child's sake. Dinner passed with Lucy chattering about the kittens and Miller responding with his usual quiet attentiveness. Only the occasional glance between the adults hinted at the unresolved tension beneath the domestic scene. After Lucy was tucked in bed, Eliza found Miller on the porch, smoking his pipe and staring into the gathering darkness. She settled into the chair beside him, the familiar evening ritual now weighted with new significance. "Tell me the full story," she said quietly, "about James Harrington and how you came to inherit Broken Pine." Miller tapped his pipe against the railing, embers scattering like fireflies. "It's not a particularly noble tale. I'd still like to hear it." He was silent a moment, gathering thoughts or perhaps courage. "I was drifting after my discharge. Worked my way west, taking whatever jobs I could find that didn't require much interaction. People react differently to this." He gestured to the scar bisecting his face. Harrington was one of the few who didn't flinch or stare. Eliza remained silent, allowing him space to continue at his own pace. "He hired me as a hand, no questions asked about my past. Paid fair wages, treated me with respect." Miller's voice softened with memory. The ranch was struggling even then. Drought years had reduced the herd. Caldwell was pressuring him to sell, but James was stubborn, believed in the future of this land even when everything seemed stacked against it and his family. Estranged. Eleanor had remarried well in Chicago. Their son was being groomed for banking or law, not ranching. James received occasional letters but no visits. Miller exhaled a stream of smoke. "When his health began failing, I took on more responsibility, learned the operation from the ground up. There were only two of us by then, all he could afford to keep on. So he left you the ranch out of gratitude for your care during his illness." Miller shook his head slowly. "Not entirely. James was clear-eyed about his legacy. Said he'd watched Eleanor and his son dismiss everything he'd built as worthless unless it could be converted to cash. Said he'd rather leave Broken Pine to someone who valued the land itself." A muscle worked in his jaw. "He made me promise never to sell to Caldwell, no matter the pressure. Said some things should remain beyond price." The simple integrity of the promise resonated with Eliza. She had glimpsed this quality in Miller from the beginning, a stubborn adherence to principles, regardless of practicality. It was both admirable and potentially dangerous in a world where men like Caldwell operated by different rules. "And you've kept that promise," she observed, "despite the difficulties of maintaining the ranch alone. A man's word should mean something." Miller's tone suggested this wasn't merely platitude, but fundamental belief, especially when given to the dying. The straightforward honor of his position touched something deep within Eliza. Despite the complications Eleanor's appearance had introduced, she found herself believing Miller's account. There was no calculation in his devotion to Broken Pine, only a genuine commitment to preserving what James Harrington had entrusted to him. "Thank you for telling me," she said finally. "I understand why you simplified the story initially, though I wish you'd trusted me with the complete version." Miller turned to face her, expression softening in the dim light. "It wasn't about trust, Eliza. I've grown accustomed to defending my right to be here. The habit of omission is difficult to break." The use of her given name, rare enough to still cause a flutter in her chest, underscored the personal nature of his admission. "What will you do about Eleanor's challenge?" "Fight it." His response was immediate, definitive. The will is legal and binding. James was sound of mind when he signed it, regardless of what Eleanor claims. And Caldwell's involvement? Miller's expression hardened. Predictable but troubling. His resources far exceed mine, especially if he's financing Eleanor's legal challenge. Could he be pursuing this out of genuine belief in her claim? A short, humorless laugh escaped Miller. Caldwell cares nothing for justice. He wants the water rights that come with Broken Pine. Eagle Creek is the only reliable water source in this section of the valley during drought years. Controlling it would give him leverage over every smaller rancher for miles. The strategic value of the property placed their situation in starker relief. This wasn't merely a personal dispute between Miller and his predecessor's ex-wife. It was about power and control of crucial resources that affected the entire community. Is there no possibility of compromise? Eliza asked. Perhaps some arrangement that would satisfy Eleanor's sense of family legacy while preserving your stewardship of the land. Miller was silent, considering. James Jr. has no interest in ranching. Even if Eleanor secured the property, they'd sell to Caldwell immediately. Then we must prepare for a prolonged fight. Eliza surprised herself with the automatic inclusion in Miller's struggle, the unconscious shift from his problem to theirs. Do you have documentation of James's wishes? Letters confirming his intentions? Miller glanced at her, something like appreciation flickering in his eyes. Some. Letters to his lawyer, a journal he kept during his final months. Those could be valuable evidence of his mental state and intentions. Eliza's mind was already cataloging possibilities. And witnesses? The doctor who treated him, the lawyer who drew up the will. Dr. Wilson still practices in Cedar Creek. The lawyer Jennings moved to Cheyenne last year. Miller studied her with growing interest. You have a strategic mind. Miss Thompson. The return to formality felt like a step backward after the intimacy of their conversation. My father was a lawyer, she explained. I grew up hearing him discuss cases over dinner. The principle remains the same. Establish clear evidence of intention and mental capacity. Miller nodded slowly. Tomorrow, I'll ride into town, speak with Dr. Wilson, telegraph Jennings in Cheyenne. His expression grew grimmer. I should also warn you that Eleanor's presence will likely intensify the gossip about our arrangement. She's skilled at manipulating opinion. I'm not concerned with gossip, Eliza said firmly, though the prospect of increased scrutiny was unsettling. Lucy and I have nothing to hide. Nevertheless, it might be prudent to be seen attending church regularly. Establishing your respectability in the community would counter some of Eleanor's potential influence. The suggestion was practical, yet Eliza found herself bristling slightly at its implications. Are you concerned about my moral standing or your legal position, Mr. Miller? He had the grace to look chagrined. Both matter, though for different reasons. I apologize if I seem calculating. You are calculating, she observed without rancor. But you're right. Community perception could affect the outcome of any legal challenge. She paused, weighing her next words carefully. However, perhaps we should consider a more definitive solution to the gossip. Miller's brow furrowed, meaning a formalization of our arrangement. Eliza maintained a steady gaze despite the hammering of her heart. Marriage would silence the most damaging speculation and strengthen your position against Eleanor's claims. The suggestion hung between them, far more consequential than their usual practical discussions of ranch operations or household management. Miller's expression shifted through surprise to consideration, then settled into something more guarded. You can't be serious, he said finally. Marriage is hardly a solution to a legal dispute. It's a practical response to a practical problem, Eliza countered, maintaining a businesslike tone despite the deeply personal nature of the proposal. A married man with a family presents a more stable image than a solitary bachelor. It would undermine Eleanor's narrative about your character and intentions. Miller studied her face, searching for something beyond the pragmatic argument she'd presented. Marriage should be more than strategic advantage, Eliza. Should be, yes. She smoothed her skirt, avoiding his gaze. But often isn't. Most marriages in society are arranged for practical benefits, financial security, social advancement, family alliances. Why should ours be different? Ours, he repeated softly, the word carrying a weight beyond its single syllable. Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. A hypothetical proposal, of course, for mutual benefit. Of course. His tone was unreadable. And what benefit would you derive from such an arrangement? The question caught her off guard, forcing her to examine motivations she'd avoided confronting directly. Security for Lucy and myself. Legal protection. A permanent home rather than temporary employment. She hesitated, then added quietly, "And you're a good man, Thomas. Many women have married for far less." Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps at her candor. "You barely know me. I know enough." She met his gaze directly. "I've seen how you treat Lucy, how you honor your promises, how you respect the land entrusted to you. These reveal character more clearly than any formal courtship might." Miller looked away, staring into the darkness beyond the porch, as if seeking answers in the night. "You deserve better than a scarred ex-soldier with a contested claim to this land. What I deserve is the right to make my own choices." Eliza's voice strengthened with conviction. "I came west, seeking marriage to a stranger based on a few exchanged letters. How is this any different, except that now I have direct knowledge of the man in question?" The logic of her position seemed to give him pause. He was silent for a long moment, pipe forgotten in his hand. If, and I emphasize if, we considered such an arrangement, it would need to be clear between us what it entailed. "Absolute honesty would be my primary condition," Eliza said. "No more omissions or simplified versions of the truth, regardless of how uncomfortable." "Agreed." He nodded slowly. "And separate quarters would remain, at least initially. I won't have you rushing into intimacy out of perceived obligation." The directness of his statement brought color to her cheeks again, but Eliza appreciated his candor. "That seems reasonable. What other terms would you propose?" "Equal partnership in ranch operations and decisions," he said after a moment's consideration. "Your insights have already proven valuable. I won't relegate you to purely domestic concerns if we formalize our arrangement." The unexpected generosity of the offer touched her. Few men would willingly share authority over business matters with a wife. "I accept that condition. And regarding Lucy?" Miller's expression softened immediately. "Lucy would have full rights as my ward, including inheritance should anything happen to either of us." "You've clearly given this some thought," Eliza observed, surprised by the readiness of his answer. A faint smile touched his lips. "Perhaps I have." The admission created a flutter of something dangerously close to hope in Eliza's chest. She had proposed marriage as a practical solution to their difficulties, yet Miller's thoughtful consideration of what such an arrangement might entail suggested he'd contemplated the possibility before tonight's discussion. "We should sleep on this decision," she said, rising from her chair. "It's too significant to rush, regardless of the practical advantages." Miller nodded, standing as well. "Wise counsel. We'll revisit the matter tomorrow after I've spoken with Dr. Wilson about James's mental state during his final illness." As they stood facing each other in the dim light of the porch lantern, Eliza was acutely aware of the fragile turning point they had reached. What had begun as a business arrangement had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership that might now transform into a marriage. Not from passion or even affection necessarily, but from mutual respect and shared purpose. "Good night, Thomas," she said softly, testing the intimacy of his given name on her lips. "Good night, Eliza." His voice carried a warmth that belied his usual reserve. "Whatever we decide, I'm grateful for your presence here. Broken Pine is better for it." As she climbed the stairs to her room, Eliza found herself contemplating the unexpected path her life had taken. She had come west seeking marriage to Gerald Fletcher, a man she'd never met. Now she faced the possibility of marriage to Thomas Miller, a man she respected, but whose heart remained largely unknown to her. Was she making another desperate choice, trading one uncertainty for another? Or was she recognizing something genuine and valuable despite its unconventional beginnings? Lucy slept peacefully in the adjoining room, her future now entangled with decisions Eliza would make in the coming days. That responsibility weighed heavily, yet Eliza found herself unexpectedly confident. Whatever challenges Eleanor Harrington and Victor Caldwell might present, facing them alongside Thomas Miller seemed increasingly like the right path forward. Not the life she'd imagined when boarding the train in Boston, but perhaps something better, a partnership forged through shared adversity rather than societal expectation. A foundation stronger than romance alone might provide. As sleep claimed her, Eliza's final thought was of Miller's face in the lantern light, that rare smile softening his scarred features. There were worse beginnings for a marriage than mutual respect and common purpose. Many unions founded on passion alone had crumbled under lesser pressures than those they faced. Tomorrow would bring decisions and consequences. But tonight, the possibility of a shared future at Broken Pine Ranch seemed not merely practical, but quietly promising. The ride back to Broken Pine Ranch stretched in tense silence. Lucy's excited chatter about the church children, the only sound breaking the heavy quiet between Eliza and Miller. The confrontation with Caldwell had shifted something fundamental between them, a declaration of allegiance that went beyond their practical arrangement. Eliza had publicly chosen Miller's side, burning bridges with Cedar Creek's most influential citizen in the process. As the ranch came into view, Miller finally spoke. "You didn't have to do that." His voice was rough with emotion he seemed unwilling to name. Challenging Caldwell publicly. "Perhaps not," she conceded, watching the familiar outline of the house emerge against the backdrop of distant mountains. "But I couldn't stand by while he slandered your character." Miller's hands tightened on the reins. "Most would consider it the wiser course. I'm not most people, Mr. Miller." She met his gaze steadily. "Nor do I regret speaking truth, regardless of the consequences." Something flickered in his eyes, admiration perhaps, or a deeper sentiment he wasn't ready to voice. "No, you certainly aren't most people." The simple acknowledgement warmed her more than it should have. As Miller helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary, Eliza felt the shifting nature of their connection. This was no longer merely an employer-employee relationship, nor even a strategic alliance against Caldwell's schemes. It had evolved into something more complex, more personal, a partnership neither had anticipated. The days following their church appearance brought subtle changes to life at Broken Pine. Miller began taking his evening meals with them regularly rather than retreating to his office. He joined Lucy's reading lessons, occasionally offering to continue the story when Eliza's voice grew tired. Most notably, he initiated conversations beyond the practical matters of ranch operations, asking about Eliza's life in Boston, her dreams before circumstances had altered her path. These quiet evenings on the porch, Lucy asleep upstairs, and the vast Wyoming sky deepening to indigo above them became a sanctuary of honesty, Eliza found herself sharing memories she'd locked away. Her sister's declining health, the desperate promise to care for Lucy, the gradual realization that Boston held no future for them. I answered Gerald Fletcher's advertisement out of necessity, she admitted one night, the admission easier in darkness, but I convinced myself it was adventure, a brave new beginning. The truth was far less romantic. Miller was silent a moment, contemplating the glowing tip of his pipe. Does that matter? The initial motivation, I mean. I'm not sure I understand. Jedi pioneers come west for all sorts of reasons, he said slowly. Running from something, running to something, desperation, ambition, dreams. He tapped his pipe against the porch railing. The land doesn't care why they came, only what they do now that they're here. The observation struck Eliza as profoundly wise. And what have I done now that I'm here? Miller's gaze found hers in the lantern light, surprisingly gentle. You've built something. From nothing. Made this place. He struggled for words, finally settling on whole again. The naked honesty in his voice created an ache in Eliza's chest. Before she could respond, hoofbeats interrupted the moment. Miller was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the rifle kept near the door. In the darkness, a rider approached, far too late for casual visitors. Stay inside, Miller ordered, his demeanor shifting from contemplative companion to vigilant. Protect her in an instant. Eliza retreated to the doorway but refused to go further, watching as Miller stepped off the porch, rifle ready but not raised. The rider pulled up short, moonlight revealing Sheriff Cooper's familiar silhouette. Miller, Cooper called, dismounting stiffly. Sorry for the late hour. What's happened? Miller lowered the rifle slightly but remained wary. Cooper removed, his hat running a hand through sweat-dampened hair. Figured you should hear this from me before rumors start flying. There was a fire in town, Fletcher's old mercantile building. Eliza stepped forward, concern overriding Miller's instruction to stay back. Was anyone hurt? No, ma'am. Building's been empty since Fletcher passed. Cooper's expression was grim. Thing is, it wasn't accidental. Someone broke in, doused the place with kerosene, and left evidence deliberately pointing to Miller. Miller's posture stiffened. What evidence? Cavalry jacket with your regiment insignia. Old letters with your name. Things nobody would accidentally leave behind. Cooper shook his head. Clumsy attempt to frame you, but dangerous all the same. Eliza's stomach knotted. Caldwell. Can't prove it, Cooper said, though his tone suggested agreement. But timing's suspicious. Coming right after Sunday's confrontation, Miller's jaw tightened visibly. He's escalating. That's why I'm here. Cooper stepped closer, lowering his voice though they were far from any listening ears. My deputy's been asking questions at the saloon. Caldwell's hired 3 men from Colorado, gun hands with ugly reputations. Eliza felt cold fear spreading through her veins. Surely he wouldn't. He would, Miller interrupted, his expression hardening. This isn't just about land anymore. It's about pride. I humiliated him by rejecting his offers. You humiliated him publicly at church. Cooper nodded grimly. I've advised Reverend Phillips to postpone his visit here. Too risky with tensions this high. What about the arson investigation? Eliza asked. I'll work it properly, but evidence is convenient. Too convenient. Cooper replaced his hat. Truth is, Miller, you should consider your options. Caldwell has influence with the territorial judge. Between the arson accusation and his petition challenging your ownership of Broken Pine, he's building a legal net. I'm not selling, Miller said flatly. Not now, not ever. Cooper sighed. Figured you'd say that, just be careful. Both of you. His gaze shifted between them. Those hired guns aren't in town for show. After Cooper departed, Miller paced the porch like a caged predator, tension radiating from his rigid frame. Eliza watched him, her mind racing through possibilities, each more alarming than the last. "You should take Lucy back to Boston," he said abruptly, stopping to face her. "First train tomorrow. I'll advance your wages, enough for tickets and a fresh start." The suggestion felt like a physical blow. "You're sending us away." "I'm protecting you," he corrected sharply. "Caldwell won't hesitate to use you against me. Already has with these rumors. The fire's just the beginning." "And you think our departure solves anything?" Anger flared in Eliza's chest, surprising in its intensity. "He'll still challenge your claim to Broken Pine, still want the land." "But you'll be safe," Miller insisted. "Lucy will be safe." Eliza squared her shoulders. "We are not leaving." Miller stared at her, frustration evident in every line of his body. "This isn't a debate, Eliza. Caldwell's bringing gunfighters to a property dispute. That should tell you everything about his intentions." It was the first time he'd used her given name, she realized distantly, the intimacy of it almost lost amid the tension of the moment. "Thomas," she countered, deliberately matching his familiarity. "We are not leaving." The use of his name stopped him short, something vulnerable flickering across his features before the hard mask of the soldier reasserted itself. "This isn't your fight, isn't it?" She stepped closer, close enough to see the conflicted emotions in his eyes despite the shadows. "You offered partnership, not marriage. Those were your exact words. Partners don't abandon each other when trouble comes." "I never asked you to fight my battles," he said, voice rough. "No, you didn't. But that's what partners do." She held his gaze steadily. "What did you tell me about pioneers? The land doesn't care why they came, only what they do now that they're here. Well, I'm here, and I'm staying." Miller's expression shifted, frustration giving way to something more complex. "Why? Why risk everything? Your safety, Lucy's future, for a piece of land that isn't yours, for a man who's offered you nothing but employment and complications?" The question cut to the heart of matters Eliza had been avoiding acknowledging, even to herself. Why indeed? Practical considerations would certainly favor returning to Boston, rebuilding their lives among familiar surroundings. Yet the thought of leaving Broken Pine, leaving him, created an ache in her chest she couldn't ignore. "Because this feels like home," she admitted softly. "Not just the ranch, though I've grown to love it, but this life we've built, the three of us, it matters to me." The simple confession hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Miller's expression softened, the hardened soldier giving way to the man beneath. "Eliza," he began, her name almost a caress on his lips. "I can't risk." The rest of his sentence was lost as a shot cracked through the night air, splintering the porch railing beside them. Miller reacted instantly, tackling Eliza to the porch floor and covering her body with his own as a second shot thudded into the wall of the house. "Stay down," he ordered, shifting to reach for the rifle he'd set aside. His weight was warm against her, his heartbeat steady despite the danger, a soldier's trained response to ambush. Flattened against the rough wooden planks, Eliza struggled to control her panic. "Lucy! Second floor, far side," Miller reminded her, voice calm despite the circumstances. "She's safe for now. Shooters in the stand of cottonwoods, 300 yards out." As if to confirm his assessment, another shot rang out, this one going wide. Miller eased off her, staying low. "Kitchen door. When I return fire, run. Lock yourself in with Lucy." The thought of leaving him exposed on the porch was unbearable. "Thomas, go," he insisted, the command softened by unexpected tenderness. "Please." Their eyes met briefly before he turned, rising just enough to sight his rifle toward the distant trees. He fired twice in rapid succession, the shots precise and measured. Eliza seized the moment to scramble up and dash through the doorway, heart pounding as she raced through the darkened house toward the stairs. Lucy was awake, sitting up in bed with wide, frightened eyes when Eliza burst into her room. "Aunt Eliza? Was that thunder?" "No, sweetheart." Eliza locked the bedroom door, moving to check that the window was secured. "Mr. Miller is handling a situation. We need to stay here until he says it's safe." More shots echoed outside, the exchange sporadic now. Eliza guided Lucy away from the windows, settling them both on the floor beside the bed where stray bullets couldn't reach. She held the trembling child close, straining to hear any sound that might indicate Miller's condition. "Are the bad men trying to hurt Mr. Miller?" Lucy whispered against her shoulder. The perceptiveness of children never failed to surprise. "Eliza, yes, but Mr. Miller is very capable. Remember how he was a scout in the cavalry? He knows how to handle himself." As if to contradict her reassurance, a new volley of shots erupted. Closer now, multiple shooters, she realized with growing dread. Not just the sniper in the trees, but others approaching the house from different directions. A coordinated attack. Minutes stretched like hours as they huddled in the darkened room, the gunfire outside interspersed with shouts and the crash of breaking glass. Smoke began to seep under the door. Not thick black smoke of a house fire, but the acrid scent of gunpowder and something chemical. A heavy thud against the bedroom door made Lucy whimper. "Eliza." Miller's voice, strained but unmistakable. "Are you in there?" Relief flooded her as she scrambled to unlock the door. Miller stood in the hallway, rifle in one hand, a nasty gash across his forehead, seeping blood into his eye. He'd been hurt, but was still standing, still fighting. "We need to move," he said without preamble. "They've set fire to the barn, using the smoke for cover to approach the house." "How many?" "At least 5. Caldwell's Colorado men, plus others." His expression was grim. "This isn't just intimidation anymore. They mean to finish it tonight." Eliza clutched Lucy closer. "What do we do?" "There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen. Access panel under the rug." Miller handed her a revolver, smaller than his rifle, but lethal nonetheless. "Take Lucy there. Bolt the trapdoor from inside. Don't come out until you hear my voice or Cooper's." The weight of the gun was foreign, in her hand, but Eliza accepted it without hesitation. "What about you?" "I'll hold them off." His matter-of-fact tone couldn't quite mask the resignation beneath it. He was preparing for a last stand, she realized with dawning horror, creating a diversion to give them time to hide. "No." She clutched his arm. "Come with us. We'll all hide until help arrives." Miller shook his head. "They'll search the house. Root cellar won't stay secret long unless they're distracted." His hand covered hers briefly, a fleeting comfort. "Sheriff Cooper's on his way. Fired 3 shots straight up before this started. Our signal. You just need to stay hidden until he arrives." Before she could protest further, the sound of shattering glass downstairs spurred them into motion. Miller led them swiftly through the house, covering their movement with practiced efficiency. In the kitchen, he pulled back the rug to reveal the trapdoor Eliza had never noticed before. "Down!" he urged as fresh gunfire erupted from the front of the house. "Quickly!" Lucy descended first, her small form disappearing into the earthen darkness. Eliza paused at the opening, turning back to Miller. In the dim light, his blood-streaked face appeared almost spectral, the scar that marked him from the war now, joined by fresh wounds. "Thomas," she said urgently, "whatever happens, you should know." "I know," he interrupted, something fierce and tender in his gaze. "I've known since you stood against Caldwell at church." His hand cupped her cheek. "Briefly, now go, stay safe." Before she could respond, more glass shattered somewhere in the house, and voices called to each other. Rough, unfamiliar voices coordinating their search. Miller pushed her gently toward the cellar entrance. "Go!" Eliza descended into darkness, pulling the trapdoor closed above her. In the pitch blackness, she found Lucy and pulled her close, the revolver clutched in her free hand. Through the wooden slats overhead, muffled sounds of the assault continued, boots on floorboards, shouts, an occasional shot. "Aunt Eliza," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling, "is Mr. Miller going to die?" The stark question pierced Eliza's heart. "No," she answered firmly, refusing to acknowledge the fear gnawing at her own certainty. "He's survived worse, and Sheriff Cooper is coming." Time lost meaning in the darkness of the root cellar. Lucy eventually dozed against Eliza's shoulder, exhaustion overcoming fear. Above them, the sounds of fighting grew more distant, moving from the house toward the barn or outbuildings. Each gunshot made Eliza flinch, wondering if this one had found Thomas, if this was the moment he fell. A loud explosion shook the ground beneath them, dust filtering down from the cellar ceiling. The barn, perhaps, or stored kerosene igniting. Lucy startled awake with a cry, and Eliza hushed her gently, straining to hear what was happening above. Silence fell, more terrifying than the noise had been. Silence meant conclusion, victory for one side or the other. Footsteps approached. The kitchen, heavy boots on wooden floors. Eliza raised the revolver, pointing it toward the trapdoor, Lucy tucked safely behind her. "Eliza?" Miller's voice, hoarse from smoke and exertion. "It's over. You can come up." Relief washed through her, so potent she nearly dropped the gun. Still, caution made her hesitate. "How do I know it's really you?" A pause, then, "Lucy, it thinks my braid-making skills are substandard." A strangled laugh escaped Eliza's throat. Only Thomas would remember such a detail at a moment like this. She reached up to push against the trapdoor, finding it already being lifted from above. Light flooded the cellar, momentarily blinding after the complete darkness. Miller stood in the kitchen, illuminated by lantern light. His shirt was torn and blood-spattered, his face smudged with soot, but he was undeniably, miraculously alive. Behind him stood Sheriff Cooper and several deputies, all looking similarly battle-worn. "Mr. Miller!" Lucy cried, scrambling up the ladder to throw herself against his legs. "You didn't die." Despite everything, a smile touched his lips as he steadied the child. "No, Miss Lucy, not today." Eliza followed more slowly, her legs unsteady after hours crouched in the cellar. Miller reached down, his hand engulfing hers as he helped her up the final rungs. The contact grounded her, the solid warmth of his grip confirming that this wasn't some desperate dream. He truly had survived. "What happened?" she asked, taking in the shattered windows, overturned furniture, and bullet-pocked walls of what had been their tidy kitchen. Cooper answered while Miller knelt to examine a small cut on Lucy's arm from their hasty retreat to the cellar. "Caldwell's men got more than they bargained for. 2 dead, 3 wounded, and in custody. The rest scattered when my deputies and I arrived." "And Caldwell himself?" Eliza asked. "Conveniently absent." Cooper's expression hardened. "Though we found evidence linking him directly to the attack. Letters to the hired guns, payment records. He won't wriggle out of this one, position or no." Miller straightened, still keeping a protective hand on Lucy's shoulder. "The barn? Gone," Cooper confirmed grimly. "They used coal oil, spread to the bunkhouse too. Main house is damaged but sound." Eliza surveyed the destruction with a curious detachment. Physical structures could be rebuilt. What mattered was that they had survived, all 3 of them. The realization crystallized something within her, certainties aligning like stars into a constellation of absolute clarity. "You should rest," Cooper continued. "My men will remain on guard tonight. Tomorrow we'll take formal statements, begin sorting out charges." After the sheriff and his deputies relocated to the porch, allowing them privacy, Eliza finally allowed herself to truly look at Miller, at Thomas. Beyond the superficial injuries, she sought signs of deeper damage, the toll this night might have taken on the man who had already endured so much. "You're hurt," she said softly, reaching up to brush gently near the gash on his forehead. "I've had worse." His voice was rough with fatigue, but something else gleamed in his eyes as they tracked her movements, a hunger that had nothing to do with food or rest. "You could have been killed." The words caught in her throat, emotion threatening to overwhelm her composure. "But I wasn't." His hand captured hers, holding it against his cheek. "Thanks to Cooper's timely arrival and a certain stubborn woman who refused to leave when a sensible person would have fled weeks ago." Despite everything, Eliza felt a smile tugging at her lips. "I believe you once observed that I'm not most people." "No," he agreed, something wondering in his tone. "You most certainly are not." Lucy tugged at Miller's sleeve, her childish concern breaking the moment. "Does your head hurt very badly, Mr. Miller? Aunt Eliza can kiss it better. That's what she does for me." A flush crept up Eliza's cheeks, but Miller's eyes never left hers, something like challenge in their depths. "That sounds like excellent medicine, Miss Lucy, if your aunt is willing." It was an invitation, tentative despite his steady gaze. A crossing of boundaries they'd established months ago when he'd offered partnership, not marriage. Eliza knew. Her response now would determine much more than momentary comfort for his injuries. "I believe proper treatment requires thorough attention," she said softly, rising on tiptoes to press her lips gently against his forehead, just beside the angry gash. The simple contact sent warmth cascading through her, intensified when his hand settled at her waist, steadying and claiming all at once. When she pulled back, his eyes had darkened, the soldier's mask completely abandoned. "Eliza," he began, voice husky. "Not now," she whispered, glancing meaningfully at Lucy, who watched them with undisguised interest. "Later, when we're alone, we have much to discuss." He nodded, understanding crossing his features. "For now, you both need rest. Dawn's only a few hours away, and tomorrow will bring its own challenges." With the deputies standing guard outside, they secured what remained of the house as best they could. Lucy insisted on staying with Eliza, unwilling to sleep alone after the night's terrors. As they settled the child in Eliza's bed, Miller lingered in the doorway, his presence protective, yet uncertain of its welcome. "You should rest too," Eliza told him gently. He shook his head. "I'll keep watch. Even with Cooper's men outside, I'd prefer certainty." The admission revealed more than his words alone, the protective instinct that drove him, the responsibility he felt for them both. Eliza understood then that this was not merely duty or obligation, but something far deeper. "Very well," she conceded. "But tomorrow, Thomas Miller, we will have a proper conversation about our future." Something like hope flickered across his features, so briefly she might have imagined it. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Dawn arrived with deceptive gentleness, golden light spilling across the battered ranch house as if the violence of the night had never occurred. Eliza woke to find Lucy still sleeping soundly beside her, the child's resilience a marvel. She dressed quietly and made her way downstairs, finding Thomas in the kitchen, attempting to restore order to the chaos. He looked up as she entered, fatigue evident in the shadows beneath his eyes, but determination in the set of his jaw. He'd clearly been working for hours. Broken glass swept away, furniture righted, the worst of the damage already addressed. "You should have woken me," she chided gently. "I would have helped. You needed rest." His gaze softened as it held hers. "Coffee's still possible if you're interested." Stove survived. The mundane offer in the midst of destruction struck Eliza as oddly touching. Coffee would be wonderful. They worked side by side, restoring a semblance of normality to the kitchen. Cooper arrived as they finished, bringing news that Caldwell had fled during the night, but was being pursued. The evidence recovered from the attackers was damning, not just for the assault on Broken Pine, but for years of similar intimidation against smaller ranchers. "His empire's crumbling," Cooper informed them with grim satisfaction. "Others are coming forward now, telling similar stories. The territorial judge has already dismissed his petition challenging your ownership of Broken Pine." It was victory, of a sort, though the price had been steep. As Cooper departed, promising further updates, Eliza surveyed the damaged ranch from the porch. The barn was a blackened skeleton, the bunkhouse little more than charred timbers. The corral fencing was splintered, though miraculously the horses had been released by one of Cooper's deputies before the fire spread. Even the kitchen garden, she'd so painstakingly cultivated, had been trampled in the chaos. Thomas joined her, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "It can be rebuilt," he said quietly. "All of it." "Yes," she agreed, turning to face him fully. "But the question remains, what exactly are we rebuilding?" He studied her face, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "That depends entirely on what you want, Eliza." The directness of his response matched her own thoughts so perfectly, she couldn't help but smile. "Do you recall our conversation the night you offered me employment? You said you were offering partnership, not marriage." "I remember. I've been thinking about that distinction." She met his gaze steadily. "Partnership implies equality, shared purpose, mutual respect. Marriage, traditionally, has often lacked those qualities." Thomas frowned slightly, trying to follow her reasoning. "I'm not sure I understand." "I'm saying," Eliza continued carefully, "that perhaps the partnership you offered was more valuable than the marriage I thought I wanted." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "And now I believe I want both." The admission came easier than she'd expected, months of unacknowledged feelings crystallizing into certainty. "A marriage that is a true partnership with you, Thomas Miller, if that's something you might consider." For a moment, he was utterly still, surprise and something like wonder crossing his features. Then slowly, deliberately, he took her hands in his. "When I said marriage requires more than I had to offer," he said quietly, "I believed it true. The war left me hollowed. I came west because emptiness seemed less obvious in empty places." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "Then you arrived with Lucy, bringing life and purpose back to this land, back to me." Eliza's heart quickened at the naked emotion in his voice. "Is that a yes, Thomas?" A smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and struggle. "It's more than yes. It's everything I never thought to hope for." He drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek with a tenderness that belied his strength. "Eliza Thompson, I'm offering partnership and marriage, a life built together, not just side by side, but hand in hand." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unexpected after the darkness of the night. "Well then, Mr. Miller, I accept both offers." Their lips met in a kiss at once gentle and fierce, confirmation and promise intertwined. When they parted, breathless and smiling, Lucy's voice called from the doorway. "Does this mean Mr. Miller is going to be my uncle now?" They turned to find the child watching them with solemn curiosity, her nightgown rumpled from sleep. Thomas looked to Eliza, silently seeking permission before kneeling to Lucy's level. "Actually, Miss Lucy," he said gravely, "if your aunt agrees, I'd like to be more than that. I'd like to be your father." Lucy considered this with all the seriousness a 7-year-old could muster. "Would I have to call you father instead of Mr. Miller? That sounds awfully formal." A laugh escaped Thomas, the sound startlingly youthful from a man who rarely showed such lightness. "Whatever you prefer. Papa, perhaps, or simply Thomas, until you decide." Lucy nodded, apparently satisfied with this arrangement. "I think you'll make a good papa." You already know how to scare away bad men and fix broken things. She glanced around at the damaged house. And we have lots of broken things now. That we do, Thomas agreed, rising to his feet. But we'll rebuild them together, as a family. The word settled over them like a blessing. Family, not what any of them had expected when Eliza and Lucy had stepped off the train in Cedar Creek, hopes pinned to a stranger's advertisement. Not what Thomas had imagined when he'd offered employment instead of marriage to a desperate woman and orphaned child. Something infinitely better. Something built not from necessity or convenience, but from choice and courage and hard-won trust. As they stood together on the porch of their damaged home, the future stretching before them, uncertain but full of possibility, Eliza felt the rightness of it settle in her bones. This was where they belonged, not just on this land, but with each other. Partnership and marriage, protection and independence, love born not from romantic illusion, but from shared struggle and genuine respect. In the end, what began as desperation had transformed into something neither of them had sought, but both now treasured beyond measure. A family forged through adversity, stronger for the trials that had tested them, and ready to face whatever. Game next, together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.